episode 55 of the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andrew Tempe. Today, we've got Lisa Morton joining us. Lisa is founder and CEO of PR and content marketing firm Roland Dransfield, based in Manchester, England. They also have offices in London and Los Angeles. Thank you so much for being with us, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, Andrew.
Thanks. So Lisa is our second guest in the mini-series we have going on organizational communication. Last week, we set a baseline in our conversation with former morning anchor Jennifer Livingston. This week, we'll get Lisa's perspectives as a longtime leader in public relations. But as we always do, before we get started, Lisa, it would be awesome if you told our listeners your story.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Thank you. So I was, as a kid, I was always selling stuff. So anything that wasn't nailed down in our house, I'd get on a garden sale or a yard sale. And I used to make my neighbour give me his old lettuces. And so I made sandwiches and sold those to the school kids next door. We lived just next door to the school. So it was always inevitable, I think, that I would start my own business. My company is called Roland Dransfield, as you said. And that is actually the name of my godfather. And he was an amazing character who had been very working class background and had become an entrepreneur a long time ago. Had met my dad. My dad used to service my dad's cars. My dad used to service Roland's cars, and he gave him a job. So one day when I was 8 years old, Roland came to our house and he said to me, "You need to start your own business," which in the 70s, probably for a young woman, it was fairly unusual for somebody to be, that supportive and that directive that, he said, a job meant just over broke. So he said, "You need to have your own business." And he brought a bucket and a sponge to my mum's house. And he said, "You can go out and wash the neighbours' cars. And if you can afford to pay me back for the bucket and the sponge after that, then you're in profits. And if you can't, then you need to go again and pay me back next week." So I was in profit day one. And I then had a car washing around till I was 15. And then I fell in love with shoes and went to work in a shoe shop. But the story there is the fact that I was learning without really knowing it from a very early age, how to run a business and what kind of qualities and strengths you need. So I think by the time I got to set my own business up when I was 27 in PR, I think kind of it was partly in my DNA that a lot of those challenges which I came across, I'd probably dealt with, from being 8 onwards. And the reason I got into communications is that I've just always loved people's stories. So I was always the nosy kid who was asking all the questions of, how do you get on? How are you successful? What are your feelings? What are your opinions on this? So it was a natural move for me, I think. So, and I still remain nosy now. So 26 years on, I still find it as interesting in, understanding where people are coming from and what it is they stand for.
Well, I just love the origin story of your business name. It's a wonderful connection to your deep past. If you had to pick one event in your life that just put rocket boosters under your career, what would that be?
Well, I think it's an example that, and I've been asked this before, and quite often somebody's got a big life-changing moment, but it's normally in relation to a big deal that they secured or an introduction. But for me, it was early on in my career. The business was very small. My son was not even 2, and I was expecting my daughter. And I'd put the team, I think we maybe had 6, 7 people in the team at that point, and I'd promoted somebody within the organisation to look after the business for 3 months or so while I had my daughter and had the maternity leave that I didn't have with my son. And 3 hours after having given birth, I was informed that she'd resigned and that she was trying to pull out some of the team members.
Oh, no.
and the clients, she'd been headhunted by an agency from out of town who wanted to set up a competitor to ours. So, I was terrified. I was devastated because, my maternity leave actually lasted about 9 hours, I think.
Right.
So, I mean, it was a devastating time, and I was frightened of losing the business. I was worried about how I was then going to look after my kids if that happened. So, long story short, I gathered all the people around me that loved me and helped to help me with the babies. And I went back to work to save the business, really. But the lesson in that was where I thought, because the narrative around me was, I'm on maternity leave, I'm not going to be around, I'm not going to be up and running, the competitor business could offer a better service. It really kind of negatively had positioned where I was and what my capabilities were, having a day-old baby. The clients in actual fact rallied round, and they just said, we absolutely aren't going to go with your colleague, and we're here for you. And we understand that it's going to take you more time, and it's a very difficult time for you, but we'll give you that time. So, and how can we help? One client actually seconded somebody out of their business to help me in the business, in my own business. So what I learned then is the fact that if you do those small things and you act with integrity and you put more in than you take out, just by one of by your values as a business or as a human being, when you have massive challenges like that, people will surprise you by supporting you. So I think for me, that accelerated my career in the fact that I backed myself, and it also made me realize that it is absolutely all about you have to put in more than you take out, because there are always going to be those times in your career where you're going to be vulnerable and you need people to come along and support you.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. On this show, on a number of occasions, we've talked about being that net giver, and not allowing to tip over to the other side where you become a net taker. There are certainly times in your life where you have to be vulnerable and be a taker, but on balance, being a net giver is definitely the way to go. So I'm glad you shared that experience. So let's dive into our conversation on communication. The logical place to start is to ask you to describe what the role of public relations is. I think a lot of folks don't really understand what PR is. And along the way in your answer, in addition to the description of the role, how does PR and corporate communications add value to an organization?
Well, it's a really good question, is what does PR stand for? Because I think certainly when I started my career, there was a lot of smoke and mirrors and people didn't really understand it. My dad actually called it organised lying, which he was an engineer, so he didn't understand at all. Said it's a bit more than that, Dad. And the Institute of PR says that public relations is the planned and sustained effort to establish and maintain understanding between an organisation and its publics, being all its stakeholders. And all those people have got an invested interest in the organisation. We changed the definition at Roland Dransfield from that because nobody could remember it, and young people coming along, it just seems very, very old and cumbersome now. We changed it to purposeful relationships. Yeah. Because for me, that's what PR is about. That is how, to engender understanding between an organisation and its publics, that's about relationship building. And I think, communication is about relationship building. So, every organisation needs to really understand, who its stakeholders are, what those stakeholders need to understand about the organisation, and how they're going to communicate that. What do they need to communicate that? And also, crucially, where do those stakeholders pick up their information about the organisation? And that's obviously changed massively since I started my career, that there are a few places. It was a newspaper, or it was a trade journal or a magazine, it was radio, it was TV, or it was direct. Whereas now, obviously, with the digital age, there are so many ways that people pick up their information. And on top of that, again, going back to the start of my career, and the thing that I never sat well with me was the request for people to bury stuff. So to bury, bad news about an organisation, keep stuff out of the media. And I mean, obviously that goes on now, but we have to be so much more transparent. We have to really, and my business and my team will only work with organisations who are willing to be completely transparent. And we help them tell their story, in the right way. So, a PR professional needs to understand how the stakeholders tick, what they need, what's important, and then make sure that their organisation shows up against what they say that they're doing.
Yeah, the role of PR especially in a large organization, it can really add a tremendous amount of value if you kind of let PR be part of and a team member alongside the organization, instead of this thing that kind of sits off to the side and generates messages. So making public relations, weaving it into the flow of work, I think is where. Is where you really gain value. And you hit it on the head with that word transparency. Let's constructively, creatively be as transparent as we possibly can be in each moment. So I really appreciate that. Call an experience in your career where you thought you had an unassailable, crystal clear message, only to find out later that the intended message was not received or was just wildly misunderstood. And we're all learners on this podcast. What can we learn from that?
So yeah, I do have. It became life-changing and business-changing when we recognised the mistake. But we had probably about 4 years ago. I was going through big growth in the business, and we're taking on a number of senior lateral hires from other agencies so that we could get territory in different sectors. And we were kind of increasing the skill set around that. So, these accomplished people came into the business, and it was exciting time. We were building towards moving into some great new offices, and there was a honeymoon period, and it was all felt like it was fantastic. And the message was that to the team, that we're going for growth. We've got to build momentum into this team. There's a dynamic here that we're all in it together. So there's going to be a lot of hard work, but the rewards will be X, Y, and Z. Something wasn't sitting with me. Probably 9 months into that process, it didn't feel right, and I felt that although that was the message, and that's how it looked on the outside, and we were experiencing some growth, there was things falling off as we were going. So we're all on this bus, but some of the wheels were falling off the bus. And mostly that was down to some of the behaviours of those senior people who had come into the business with agendas, possibly egos, yes. There were expectations of the more junior team to do stuff that the senior team maybe weren't prepared to do because they felt that was outside of their remit. I was kind of ruminating on it when I went away on a holiday. And when I landed from a week's holiday, I turned my phone on. It was all hell had let loose in the team. And there was bickering going on. It was awful. I'll never forget the day. So I drove back to the office, went into the office the next day, the new office, and I sat the whole team down. I said, okay, the issue we've got here is that although I think I communicate the values, the values of the business and the values that are important to me, it's clear that we're not all in this together because there's no clarity around the behaviours and the values of this team. So we're all thinking different things. And I called a couple of people out because the behaviours were not acceptable. So I just said, look, we are going on this bus together. We did a big piece of work. We worked on our values, our purpose and our mission. And long story short, it changed the business. 4 years down the line, we still have those values that we talk about every day. They're part of our vernacular. They're part of our narrative with clients. Each team member, no matter how little experience they have, has the ability and it's empowered to call out behaviours that might not be aligned with those team values, and in a fun way sometimes. So before it even becomes a problem, we know that we're on the same page. And so as a result of that piece of work we've done, that totally now is part of the work we do with our clients in helping them find their values, their purpose, their vision and mission, and making sure that they also communicate and embed them in everything they do, so that the PR part of it and the purposeful relationships is right at the core of what they do, and everything comes out from there. So yeah, we got it wrong, and we're a communications agency, so we fixed it, and then things changed dramatically.
Yeah, well, I think that gives our listeners actually some degree of comfort, knowing that that a company that's in the communications business can get internal communications wrong sometimes, and that's that I think that level of vulnerability is awesome, because it's what you did in setting the vision, your values, getting your culture really established after saying it once and it really didn't take, and then you recognize to just really get after it, and that consistency and persistence of the message has paid off. That's what I'm hearing from that. So
definitely. And also, Andrew, we have one of our values is admit it, fix it, move on.
Yeah.
And that's not a cop-out. That's not just, okay, we've screwed up there, so it doesn't matter, let's just, tomorrow's another day. That's about really having that safe space as a team to say, and internally or to our clients, and to give that permission to our clients to say, this is a relationship. Sometimes they're going to be great. Sometimes it's going to be not so great. But if we are brave enough to say, okay, we didn't get that right, often what you end up when you do the work to rectify that, you end up with a much better scenario than you did even before the mistake happened, which is like positive development in any relationship. So that's really important to us. And, if we're not making mistakes, we're not making things happen. And that's true of any organization. But that empowerment to be able to figure out how to fix it and get into a better space is really important.
Yeah, I'll use one of the current buzzwords, psychological safety. You're creating those psychologically safe environments to allow anybody on the team to weigh in and kind of corral the culture back to its core. I think that's so important. Communication ranks in the top 10 list on many lists of skills for the future. Would like to tap into your advice here that you might have for our listeners on how to improve their communication skills. So any specific tools that you might recommend for people that want to boost their skill level here?
So very simply, and this is an expression that my grandma used to say when we were little, is 2 ears, 1 mouth. I mean, start with that. You never get the information you need if you're talking all the time. And you do get the information you need, and you do get the intelligence that you need to help to change things, improve things if you listen. And it's about being curious about people and asking those questions. What's their story? Or in a commercial situation, how can your products or your service, how can you help other people solve their challenges and their problems? So I think it's absolutely always about listening. And so I don't think there's any particular textbook in that respect. I think it's just about being open to those conversations. I think also always think about how you can help people. So if that is your go-to, which is, our team, that's the magic in our days. Like, who can we help today? Who can we connect? What kind of challenges can we solve? But also ask for feedback. So many people are so fixed on their view and their lens on the world that they would never take the time to say, how was that communication? How was that conversation for you? Did you feel railroaded? Did you feel that we got out of it? Are we coming away from this conversation or this piece of communication both with more clarity?
Yeah, yeah. I'm hearing active listening for sure. You are Jennifer last week said 2 ears, one mouth. You hear that all the time, but what I loved from what you just said was the empathy piece, being able to have that open mind. I like to think of it as kind of softening my mind just a little bit, because if I'm one of the things that I find is so hard about communication is that people are so in tune with what they are going to say next that that you have all of this noise in your head of okay, I'm getting ready for my punchy comeback, or that you lose track of really what's going on. So if you can soften your mind a bit and just open up a little bit, then all sorts of wonderful things can happen from a communication perspective. So we're going to take a really short break for an advert here, and we'll be right back. Thanks for listening to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andrew Temte. In my book, Balancing Act, Teach, Coach, Mentor, Inspire, I explore the characteristics required of leaders who must find balance between strength and vulnerability, confidence and selflessness, passion and measure, and leadership and followership. Balancing Act is available today at Amazon.com. And we're back. So we've got Lisa Morton here. She's talking to us about communications. Lisa, many leaders ignore building communication skills in their teams because they make the erroneous assumption that everyone already knows how to communicate. Why is this a false narrative? Really, the sub-question here is, why is communication so hard?
Well, I think many leaders can't communicate themselves. So that's why there's kind of so little emphasis on it in organizations at times. Or they can't communicate, or they don't want to communicate. And that's, so that's why there's often that fallacy. Communicating isn't hard if you do the things that we've just been talking about. And I think also it's easy as you go through your career to stick to the people that are like you.
Yep.
And you're never going to learn. You're never going to have that empathy. You're never going to walk a mile in another's shoes if you just stick to that echo chamber of people who reflect your opinion back to you. So there's no learning there. And so I think that it's interesting that there's your listeners may or may not know there's a very well-known footballer called Gary Neville who was played for Manchester United, and an amazing, very famous football manager called Sir Alex Ferguson, who was manager of Manchester United for a long, long time. And we're lucky enough to work with Gary, and he always tells us that Alex Ferguson always used to say, tell people what's going on in the boardroom. And so that particularly resonated with me. I had that conversation with him in COVID because we had no toolkit really for what on earth went on there. People were impacted so, drastically, and our business was. So I just thought, well, I'm just going to tell everybody every day what's going on in the boardroom. And it was a metaphorical boardroom, obviously, because we're all in our kitchens or wherever. And so I didn't hide anything. And I just said, I've not got the answers. I don't have the answers. I'll tell you literally hour by hour what we're experiencing and how the business is being impacted. And that then, because I was open and vulnerable about that and honest, it encouraged the team then to be open and honest about how they were feeling. And again, that empathy piece. And it impacted people very differently. Everyone's at different circumstances and different concerns. So I think it starts there. You can't expect your team to communicate with you and maybe give you intel on how things are going internally in the organization, or maybe how things sit with clients, without feeling safe that they are able to communicate that stuff back. And the other thing is, so many leaders, or they're not a leader if they do this, but so many senior management only want to give good news. And therefore you breed a culture there where it's good news only can be shared. So people are frightened of coming forward with the not good news story. And I know that I would rather have the bad news or a challenge communicated to me early on so we can do something about it, than people only want to come to you with good news, or they might get sacked, or they might. So it's that two-way, honest communication, and the same for businesses and brands with their external customers. Be honest, and that's how we can get better at communication.
Yeah, as a leader of a reasonably large organization for over 20 years, I can attest that the emotional waste that is generated when the boardroom door shuts and things are going on in there that are not communicated out, boy, the water cooler just gets rolling with all sorts of conspiracy theories. And maybe there's 10% truth, but then there's 90% that just goes totally off the rails. So, thank you for modeling that behavior in your own business, because things aren't just always good news, and you've got to. You use the word vulnerability again. That is so important for leaders to show that vulnerability. So, thumbs up there. Lisa, we're getting close to the end of our time together, and I'd like you to imagine that there's a school leaver, or in the U.S., what we would call a high school graduate, or a college graduate, a university graduate, sitting right in front of you, especially someone who might want to go into the world of communications. What advice do you give to them?
Well, if you're looking to kind of pitch and find a job, so if you're not going through a recruitment consultant, and quite often I think if you're starting out in your career, for me, I am always impressed by people that approach the business directly with show me that they really understand what our organisation is about, the clients that we work with, and has got an intelligent and insightful view on how they feel they could add value. So I think, if I get a blanket email that's come round, somebody's clearly trying to get into our industry, I won't be interested in that. So again, we'll be looking for people who are interested in organisations. Every day, we'll be sitting in front of an existing client or a prospect, and we're digging into what makes them tick. So I need to see that interest and that curiosity in whoever is going to. Otherwise, if they're not looking for a story, or they've not got that that curiosity, this isn't the industry for them. So that's impressive, and for me to feel that that person's taken time to research the business and can kind of reflect back some of the stuff that we've done and why they want to be part of that team. Once you're in the job, I think again. Listen, ask questions. Don't finish people's sentences off, because we sometimes have that. And if it happens, and I always say to the team, never do that, because you've already decided what that person's going to say, and you never know what that person's going to say till they've said it. Right. And then again, from day one, make purposeful relationships. So make sure that your net worth is your network is your net worth. But more than that, commercially, what it is if you, from the first day of your career, you always look to see how you can add value and how you can help people. As we said before, at some point, whether that's maybe you want a career, you want a change of direction in your career, or you want somebody to help you with an opportunity, those people will help you because of that integrity that you've shown from the early days, and it's the little things you do every day. And one of the best pieces of advice I got when I started out in my career was I was told by a journalist to be really nice to the junior reporters, the trainee reporters, because one day they're going to be the editor. And so if you want your piece on the front page, then as it was in those days, if you've not been nice to the trainees, they'll remember. And that's just a good kind of analogy for life, I think. It's just, we are here. I dig into some of the relationships I made literally when I started my career at times. And I can do that because I've, hopefully most times I've acted with integrity and put more in than I took out. So that's my best bit of advice for anybody getting into the communications world, or any world in actual fact.
Yeah, you talked about the world of communications, but being curious, being agile, having open ears, and building strong relationships up, down, and across an organization, not just focused up, but focused all the way around, is just solid advice for any school leaver in really any industry. Lisa, I have enjoyed getting to know you today. I know that our listeners have done so as well. So I want to thank you for being here. Is there anything else that you want us to know about Roland Dransfield?
We also have a podcast company that we've launched called Purposeful Podcast. So we can help advise people who want to start their own podcasts, or we can help them to produce the whole thing. So, and that's been, again, it's just interesting how communications move on. You're doing the same thing. It's a way of really building a great community with an audio strategy. So I've really enjoyed doing that. So if we can help anybody at all, from in the States or anywhere else, then, more than happy to have that conversation.
That's awesome. Well, thank you again for being here. I'm Andrew Temte. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us on all of the major podcast services. Please like, subscribe, give us a rating, and we will see you next time.